All right, hello everybody. We are going back to this George MacDonald book from the 1800s. George MacDonald was C.S. Lewis's spiritual mentor. And he said that every book he ever wrote, he quoted either directly or indirectly George MacDonald. And so we're out here by the ocean. That's the ocean today. Leia's with us. And I just feel like getting into the book, so let's do that. I hope you're well. I pray love to your heart and wisdom in your life and everything good. Thanks for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. I'm so glad to share this with other people. This is just how I live my life, and I just let everybody in, I guess. So this book is called Sir Gibbie, and it's about a boy, and he's mute, he's not able to speak. I forgot when I'm looking this way, the mic is over here, so sorry if you didn't hear that for a second. I can move it. I'm used to talking into the camera, and I forgot I brought a mic this time. I think I'll do this. Sorry if that made a lot of noise. I'm new to the mic thing. It's kind of one extra step, so I'm not that much of a one extra step kind of girl. But, you know, if you guys can hear it better, then that's good. I mean, lots of steps to get here. It's not like that. It's just, I try to keep things really simple. Or else, we sometimes make excuses not to do them. All right. All right, I do this for people to know that we're starting the book. Okay, we are on the chapter called The Minister's Defeat. The minister's name is Mr. Sclater. And before that, we had Donald's lodging. All right, so we're a couple pages into this chapter, but just trust that you're here for a reason today. I always say that because I think that, What are we looking at? Oh yeah, the ocean with the sky. I like looking at that view, but you can't really tell. Those are all houses down there, and anyway. Whatever, we're looking at the ocean, and you can hear a bunch of bees in the background. So he had just hit Gibbie over the head with a chalkboard thing, back in the 1800s type of little slate, because he was offended. He thought Gibbie was making fun of him. He wasn't making fun of him at all, you'll see. And so the minister, this is a minister who thinks, oh, I'd never lose it. And he did, Don't worry, it's not anyway. I'm sorry I have hurt you, said the minister, not a little relieved at the sound, because Gibbie just laughed to try to get him at his ease, But how dared you write such an insolence? A clergyman never gets drunk. Gibbie picked up the frame which the minister had dropped in his fall, because he fell after he did that, right? Watch out. A piece of the slate was still sticking in one side, and he wrote upon it, I will know better the next time. I thought it was always whiskey that made people like that. I beg your pardon, sir. So he had come over to where Donald was staying. Donald is Gibbie's brother now because Donald's parents sort of adopted Gibbie, took him in after both his parents had died, has passed away. But Gibbie just got an inheritance from some distant relative he never knew. And he wanted to let Donald go to school, so he paid for Donald's schooling. And so Donald had his own room and board somewhere. And Gibbie went to visit him now that he first got into town, because they always lived in the country. Well, they didn't. Gibbie grew up in this town. But anyway, I'll let you can listen to the earlier parts of the book if you'd like to. Hold on. I'm just catching you up a bit. And so anyway, Mr. Sclater went and was like, why are you over here talking to him at 10 at night? Well, it's his brother. They talked all the time. You know, I mean, Donald would talk and Gibbie knew how to write and how to do signs of some sort. Anyway, they understood each other and they were just, you know, everything was good, but Mr. Sclater was offended somehow and started yelling at him for not being home, and Gibbie didn't know because he had lived on the mountainside and took care of sheep all night sometimes. His parents never were like, where were you? You know, because they knew he's a good boy. But this guy just assumes all this stuff, you know, and is always projecting bad onto other people in some ways. And not always, but anyway, I'll let you enter the story. And so Gibbie just thought he must be drunk because his dad would get drunk. And he died of drinking too much whiskey. And weird. On my way up here, I saw a guy and had a shirt on and it said something like, you know, whiskey makes it better or whatever. But that's what Gibbie's father died of. So I don't know. Jesus turned water into wine, so no, obviously he teaches us to be sober in all things and enjoy life and not be taken in by anything except God. Anyway, he handed him the fragment, ran to his own room, returned presently looking all right, and when Mr. Sclater would have attended to his wound, would not let him even look at it, laughing at the idea. Still further relieved to find there was nothing to attract observation to the injury, and yet more ashamed of himself, the minister made haste to the refuge of their work. But it did not require the gleam of the paper substituted for the slate to keep him that morning in remembrance of what he had done. Indeed, it hovered about him long after the gray of the new slate had passed into a dark blue. So they had to buy a new chalkboard for him, you know. And it stayed with him. Well, how he let that happen, you know, why he lost his cool. From that time, after luncheon, which followed immediately upon lessons, Gibbie went and came as he pleased. Mrs. Sclater begged he would never be out after 10 o'clock at night, you know, without having let them know that he meant to stay all night with his friend, which is really, no, his adopted brother, right? But not once did he neglect this request, and they soon came to have perfect confidence, not only in any individual promise he might make, but in his general punctuality. Mrs. Sclater never came to know anything of his wounded head, and it gave the minister a sharp sting of compunction, as well as increased his sense of moral inferiority when he saw that for a fortnight or so he never took his favorite place at her feet, evidently that she should not look down on his head. So he would sit down on this little stool next to Mrs. Sclater and listen to her or whatever, but he didn't for 2 weeks, right? A fortnight, because that's a fortnight before Fortnight came out, right? That's 2 weeks. 2 weeks' time. Because he didn't want her to notice it, because he was just, wow. It reminds me of a Rumi quote. The Sufi poet Rumi said, about others' sin, be like night, you know, In forgiveness, be like the river or the ocean or something. In love, be like the ocean. It was so beautiful. I have it in my room somewhere, this beautiful poem. I think I have it on the wall by my desk, but I hardly ever read it to people. I got it when I was in Turkey. But in that way, he is. There's a verse that says, love covers a multitude of sins. It doesn't mean you keep secrets for people and hide and don't confront people or whatever needs to be done, actually, but once someone has apologized, you just do your best to give it to God. And even before that, we forgive us our debts as we forgive our debts. We give the debts to God so that we don't have to have the heavy burden of carrying all of the weight of people's sins and wrongdoings. Anyway, the same evening they had friends to dinner. Already Gibbie was so far civilized, as they called it. They called it civilized, that they took this he's such a beautiful young man, and put him in like these proper city clothes and a hat and tried to get him to wear gloves. He wouldn't wear gloves, right? But it's beautiful up here. That same evening, right, they had friends to dinner. Already Gibbie was so far civilized, as they called it, that he might have sat at any dining table without attracting the least attention. But that evening he attracted a great deal, for he could scarcely eat his own dinner for watching the needs of those at the table with him, ready to spring from his chair and supply the least lack. This behavior naturally harassed the hostess. Mrs. Sclater, right? She didn't like that because they have servants for that, I guess. We'll see. And at last, upon one of those occasions, the servants happening to be out of the room, she called him to her side and said, "You are quite right to do that now, Gilbert, but please never do such a thing when the servants are in the room. It confuses them and makes us all uncomfortable." Gibbie heard with obedient ear, but took the words as containing express permission to wait upon the company in the absence of their ministration. When, therefore, the servants finally disappeared, as was the custom there in small households, immediately after placing the dessert, Gibbie got up. "Leah, don't eat the dirt. Stop. Don't eat the dirt. I don't want you getting sick again, little one. No, 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 no. That's dirt." Sorry, she got sick last week. Here, want your water? Drink that. There you go. We don't want that again. It's not the most fun having a sick dog, but we took care of her. Whoops. Some ants. Anyway. All right, so anyway. Gibbie got up, and much to the amusement of the guests, waited on them as quite a matter of course. But they would have wondered, could they have looked into the heart of the boy and beheld the spirit in which the thing was done, the soil in which was hid the root of the service. For to him the whole thing was sacred, as an altar rite to the priest who ministers. Round and round the table, deft and noiseless, he went, altogether aware of the pleasure of the thing, not at all of its oddity, which, however, had he understood it perfectly, he would not in the least have minded. He didn't care if it was odd to them. He wanted to serve. All this may, both in Gibbie and the narrative, seem trifling, but I more than doubt whether, until our small services are sweet with divine affection, our great ones, if such we are capable of, will have ever the true Christian flavor about them. And then such eagerness to pounce upon every smallest opportunity of doing the will of the master could not fail to further proficiency in the service throughout. And the word master here is capitalized because it's talking about Jesus, who was our servant as well. No, sorry, here. I don't know if you're meant to eat that. I don't know. This is really my first dog, so I don't know a lot of things about dogs. It's just, anyway. Okay. So, presently the ladies rose, and when they had left the room, the host asked Gibbie to ring the bell. He obeyed with alacrity, and a servant appeared. She placed the utensils for making and drinking toddy, after Scotch custom, upon the table. And so they're in Scotland. George MacDonald is Scottish. Hold on. A shadow fell upon the soul of Gibbie. For the first time since he ran from the city, he saw the well-known appointments of midnight, or I just won't say that word because it's not the same as what we call it these days. Midnight getting together of whatever. Associated in his mind with all the horrors from which he had fled, the memory of the old nights in the street as he watched for his father and then helped him home because his father would be drunk from whiskey and he would go help other people drunk, statesmen and stuff like that to their houses so that they wouldn't fall in ditches. Anyway, the memory of the old nights in the street as he watched for his father and then helped him home, of his father's last prayer, drinking and imploring. He was imploring God to forgive him, stuff like that. Of his white, motionless face the next morning because he wasn't alive anymore. Of the row at Lucky Kroll's, so Miss Kroll's house, there was a certain thing that happened. Someone was unalived. I'll just say it like that, over a misunderstanding and someone, taking offense. Because when you're drinking, your inhibitions are down, and so you can take offense a lot easier, and then things can escalate, and they did. And the poor black man's gaping throat, all these terrible things came back upon him. He saw this as a young boy. It's too bad. But as he stood staring at the tumblers and the wine glasses and the steam kettle, "What is the girl thinking of?" exclaimed the minister, who had been talking to his next neighbor, when he heard the door close behind the servant. "She has actually forgotten the whiskey. Sir Gilbert," he went on, with a glance at the boy, "as you are so good, will you oblige me by bringing the bottle from the sideboard?" Gibbie stared at the sound of his name, but did not move from the place. After a moment, the minister, who had resumed the conversation, thinking he had not heard him, looked up. There, between the foot of the table and the sideboard, stood Gibbie, as if fixed to the floor, gazing out of his blue eyes at the minister. Those eyes filmy with gathering tears. The smile utterly faded from his countenance. Would the master have drunk out of that bottle? He was thinking with himself, imagining some chance remark had hurt the boy's pride, and not altogether sorry. It gave hope of the gentleman he wanted to make him. Mr. Sclater spoke again. "It's just behind you, Sir Gilbert, the whiskey bottle, that purple one with the silver top." Gibbie never moved, but his eyes began to run over, with the tears. A fearful remembrance of the blow he had given him on his head rushed back on Mr. Sclater. Could it be the consequence of that? Was the boy paralyzed? He was on the point of hurrying to him, but restrained himself. Rising with deliberation, approached the sideboard. A nearer sight of the boy's face reassured him. "I beg your pardon, Sir Gilbert," he said. "I thought you would not mind waiting on us as well as on the ladies. It is your own fault, There," he added, pointing to the table. "Take your place and have a little toddy. It won't hurt you." Oh, wow. The eyes of the guests were, by this time, fixed on Gibbie. What could be the matter with this curious creature? They wondered. His gentle merriment and quiet delight in waiting upon them had given a pleasant concussion to the spirits of the party, which had at first threatened to be rather a stiff and dull one. And there now was the boy, all at once looking as if he had received a blow or some cutting insult which he did not know how to resent. Between the agony of refusing to serve and the impossibility of putting his hand to unclean ministration, Gibbie had stood as if spellbound. He would have thought little of such horrors in Lucky Kroll's hof, but the sight of the things here terrified him. He felt as a Corinthian Christian must, catching a sight of one of the elders of the church feasting in a temple. So in Corinth, some of them would eat meat that had been sacrificed to animals because it was cheaper to buy that meat, and they just didn't care. They thought, God covers this. But it's for some people that caused an offense because they saw that meat has been sacrificed to some other idol. Why are you eating it? There's hawks overhead. At least this one. I got Leia under my legs. We got you, girl. Anyway, but the sight of things here terrified him. He felt as a Corinthian Christian must, catching a sight of one of the elders of the church feasting in a temple. But the last words of the minister broke the painful charm. He burst into tears and, darting from the room, not a little to his guardian's relief, hurried to his own room, his own. The guests stared, bewildered. "He'll be gone to the ladies," said their host. "He's an odd creature. Mrs. Sclater understands him better than I do. He's more at home with her." Therewith he proceeded to tell them his history and whence the interest he had in him, not bringing down his narrative beyond the afternoon of the preceding day, like he didn't talk about what had happened right before. The next morning Mrs. Sclater had a talk with him concerning his whim of waiting at table, telling him he must not do so again. It was not the custom for gentlemen to do the things that servants were paid to do. It was not fair to the servants, and so on, happening to end with an utterance of mild wonder at his fancy for such a peculiarity. This exclamation Gibbie took for a question, or at least the expression of a desire to understand the reason of the thing. He went to a side table, and having stood there a moment or two, returned with a New Testament, in which he pointed out the words, "But I am among you as he that serveth." Jesus said that, right? Giving her just time to read them, he took the book again, and in addition presented the words, "The disciple is not above his master, but every one that is perfect shall be as his master." So Jesus came as a servant. So ought we. In all moments. Even serving. It's serving to give someone love when they've wronged you. Of course, like I said before, to have boundaries, but to still love them. Love is kind. To know that God can redeem them. Call them back to himself. Anyway, Mrs. Sclater was as much put out as if he had been guilty of another worse indiscretion. The idea of anybody ordering his common doings, not to say his oddities, by principles drawn from a source far too sacred to be practically regarded, that's how she's seen it, right, was too preposterous to have ever become even a notion to her. What did people think in that time? She was a minister's wife, and they didn't think to apply the New Testament to their lives, right? The way that Jesus was to their lives. Henceforth, however, it was a mote to trouble her mind's eye, a mote she did not get rid of until it began to turn to a glimmer of light. I need hardly add that Gibbie waited at her dinner table no more, because she asked him not to, in that particular case. But he still had the servant's heart, obviously. Okay, chapter XLIV, that's 44. 4. All right, the sinner. No man can order his life, for it comes flowing over him from behind. But if it lay before us, and we could watch its current approaching from a long distance, what could we do with it before it had reached the now? In likewise, a man thinks foolishly who imagines he could have done this and that with his own character and development, if he had but known this and that in time. Wow, I was getting a vision of this on the way up here. There was a movie or something called Adjustment Bureau, and Matt Damon was in it, but it was like all these doors would open, and God was just showing that so to me somehow in my prayer on this verse that I was meditating on. But it's just like he will open doors to move you along this river sometimes and change your course. And, because it says, this wasn't the verse I was meditating on, but all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purposes, in Christ Jesus. Like God will work out his purposes. And like C.S. Lewis says in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis, who brought me to MacDonald, George MacDonald here, this author, is like, some people are God is making them into Christians and they're not yet calling themselves by that name. We don't know. And some people are still calling themselves, like Mr. and Mrs. Sclater here, that, in this book, and they're moving further and further away from it. But I'm not saying these people are. You'll see what happens. All right, the sinner. So now, okay, and likewise, a man thinks foolishly who imagines he could have done this and that with his own character and development if he had but known this and that in time. Were he as good as he thinks himself wise, he could at best have produced a fine cameo in very low relief with a work in the round, in a play, like you just show up as a cameo, which he is meant to be. He could have done nothing. He could have done nothing. The one secret of life and development is not to devise and plan, but to fall in with the forces at work, to do every moment's duty aright, that being the part in the process allotted to us, right? Always do what is loving, what is truly loving. Whatever we do sets a precedence. And so, live with excellence in every moment, the best you can. God helping us, right? The one, I'll read that part again. The one secret of life and development is not to devise and plan, but to fall in with the forces at work, to do every moment's duty aright, that being the part in the process allotted to us, and let come not what will, for there is no such thing, but what the eternal thought, look with a capital T, wills, for each of us, has intended in each of us from the first. If men would but believe that they are in process of creation and consent to be made, let the Maker handle them as the potter his clay, yielding themselves in respondent motion and submissive, hopeful action with the turning of his wheel. They would ere long find themselves able to welcome every pressure of that hand upon them, even when it was felt in pain, and sometimes not only to believe, but to recognize the divine end in view, the bringing of a son into glory, the son or daughter, right? We're all sons in Jesus Christ, because the sons would get the inheritance, so we're co-heirs. I got it, Leah. We're moving these things out of your way. I got it. It's okay. These little burr things. It's okay. It's okay. The bringing of a son into glory, whereas behaving like children who struggle and scream while their mother washes and dresses them, they find they have to be washed and dressed, notwithstanding. Oh, ow, ow, ow. Hold on. What is it, Leah? Where are you going? Maybe there's ants on her. Come here. Okay, just sit up here is fine. So not like the children who struggle and scream while their mother washes and dresses them. They find they have to be washed and dressed, notwithstanding, and with more discomfort. They may even have to find themselves set half naked but half dried in a corner to come to their right minds and ask to be finished. They just have their diaper and their shirt on or whatever, and they're sitting in a corner. They don't get the rest of the outfit on because they need a little time out. I remember those days. Wow. All right. At this time, neither Gibbie nor Donald strove against his creation, what the wise of the world call their fate. In truth, Gibbie never did, and for Donald, the process was at present in a stage much too agreeable to rouse any inclination to resist. So he was getting schooling. He always wanted to get schooling. He was always reading books that he borrowed from other people and stuff. He never had money for school before, so he's not resisting now. He enjoyed his new phase of life immensely. If he did not distinguish himself as a scholar, it was not because he neglected his work, but because he was at the same time doing that by which alone the water could ever rise in the well he was digging. He was himself growing, far too eager after knowledge to indulge in emulation, right? So he's not emulating other people and trying to act scholarly, right? He gained no prizes. What had he to do with how much or how little those around him could eat as compared to himself? No work noble or lastingly good can come of emulation any more than of greed. I think the motives are spiritually the same. To excite it is worthy only of the commonplace vulgar schoolmaster, whose ambition is to show what fine scholars he can turn out, that he may get the more pupils. And so they'll try to tell their students to emulate others so that it looks like they have good students so they can get more students, but it's the same. He said he thinks spiritually it's from the same place as greed, when you just want and you're greedy for more stuff. But anyway, emulation is the devil's shadow of aspiration. So it's good to have aspirations, but not emulate. Aspire to these high things. Anyway, the set of the current in the schools is at present towards a boundless swamp, but the wise among the scholars see it, and wisdom is the tortoise which shall win the race. You know how there's the tortoise and the rabbit, and the turtle goes the slow way, slow and steady wins the race. And the rabbit just runs and tries to take all these shortcuts, but ends up in all of these ditches and things. And the turtle ends up winning the race. And so he's saying, sometimes it is important to do this slower route, In the meantime, how many with the legs and the brain of the hare, that's the rabbit is the hare, right? The tortoise and the hare, will think they are gaining it, while they are losing things whose loss will make any prize unprized. The result of Donald's work appeared but very partially in his examinations, which were honest and honorable to him. It was hidden in his thoughts, his aspirations, his growth, and his verse, right? Because he's a poet. All which may be seen should I one day tell Donald's story, and he did. I don't remember if I got to read it, but George MacDonald wrote about Donald Grant, that's what they're called. For Gibbie, the minister had not been long teaching him before he began to desire to make a scholar of him. Partly from being compelled to spend some labor upon him, the boy was gradually developing an unusual facility in expression. His teacher, compact of conventionality, belongs to yesterday. That's in the song, Greece is the word. I did a whole teaching on it. I don't know if I have it posted. I probably don't. It was one of my early ones, like 5 years ago or something. I was talking about the anointing of God. I do have one that I did after that. I used the word Greece as anointing, like Christos is the anointing oil, the Messiah. Anyway, it's a really amazing song. But okay, so his teacher, compact of conventionalities, would have modeled the result upon some writer imagined by him a master of style. But the hurtful folly never got any hold of Gibbie. All he ever cared about was to say what he meant and avoid saying something else, to know when he had not said what he had meant, and to set the words aright. Right. It resulted that when people did not understand what he meant, the cause generally lay with them, not with him, and that if they sometimes smiled over his mode, it was because it lay closer to nature than theirs. They would have found it a hard task to improve it. So they didn't, anyway, they weren't getting him lots of times, but what the fault with his organs of speech was, I cannot tell. His guardian lost no time in having them examined by a surgeon in high repute, a professor of the university. But Dr. Skinner's opinion put an end to question and hope together. Gibbie was not in the least disappointed. He had got on very well as yet without speech. It was not like sight or hearing. The only voice he could not hear was his own, and that was just the one he had neither occasion nor desire to hear. As to his friends, who had known him the longest, minded his dumbness the least. You know, dumb just means can't speak in those times. Deaf and dumb, but he's not deaf. But the moment the defect was understood to be irreparable, Mrs. Sclater very wisely proceeded to learn the finger speech. And as she learned it, she taught it to Gibbie. So how to do sign language. You know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. I know the alphabet, so at least I can talk to someone by spelling things out. That's why I really want it. I love learning languages. P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Anyway, I know the English alphabet. So she taught it to Gibbie. As to his manners, which had been and continued to be her chief care, a certain disappointment followed her first rapid success. She never could get them to take on the case-hardening needful for what she counted the final polish, the needful. That's how they say it. They always retained a certain simplicity which she called childishness. It came, in fact, of childlikeness, not childishness. There's a difference. Jesus says you must be like a child to enter into the kingdom of heaven. All right? But the lady was not child enough to distinguish the difference, as great as that between the back and the front of a head. As then, the minister found him incapable of forming a style, though time soon proved him capable of producing one. So the minister's wife found him as incapable of putting on company manners of any sort, as most people are incapable of putting them off without being rude. Wow. Put on your company manners. He treated everyone the same, so he wouldn't do it like that. Anyway, it was disappointing to Mrs. Sclater, but Gibbie was just as content to appear what he was, as he was unwilling to remain what he was. Being dumb, she would say to herself, he would pass in any society, but if he had had his speech, she never could have succeeded in making him a thorough gentleman. He would have always been saying the right thing in the wrong place. By the wrong place, she meant the place where alone the thing could have any pertinence. In after years, however, Gibbie's manners were, whether pronounced such or not, almost universally felt to be charming. But Gibbie knew nothing of his manners, any more than of the style in which he wrote. The sun's coming out. Wow, look at the bees. There's the sun. I think I got the camera on it. Yeah, here's my face in the sun instead of this shadow, but whatever. Not shadow, but... Okay. You want to go under again? In the shade? All right. Oh, there's the hawk overhead again. Here, Leia, do you want to get under here? Come on. Anyway, I think she and I both are wanting breakfast. But it's going to be at least an hour and 20 minutes for that, I think. Anyway, okay, I'm sorry. I'm all right, so let's go back to this. So one night on their way home from an evening party, the minister and his wife had a small difference, probably about something as little real consequence to them as the knowledge of it is to us. But by the time they reached the home, they had got to the very summit of politeness with each other. Like they were politely, triggered and disagreeing with each other. Hold on. I'm going to lower this a little. Gibbie was in the drawing room, as it happened, waiting their return. At the first sound of their voices, he knew, before a syllable reached him, that something was wrong. When they entered, they were too much engrossed in indifference to heed his presence, and went on disputing with the utmost external propriety of words and demeanour, but with both injury and a sense of injury in every tone. Had they looked at Gibbie, I cannot think they would have been silenced, but while neither of them dared turn eyes the way of him, neither had moral strength sufficient to check the words that rose to the lips. A discreet, socially wise boy would have left the room, but how could Gibbie abandon his friends to the fiery darts of the wicked one, right? It says, in Ephesians 6, to put on the whole armor of God every day, right? The helmet of salvation, the shield of faith, which is able to extinguish all the fiery darts of the evil one. So it's in the Bible that he has them and he shoots them at us. And it says in 1st or 2nd Peter that he's like a roaring lion, looking about whom he may devour. And we're meant to have the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And the feet girded with peace, the peace of the gospel, and our waist girded with the truth, and breastplate of righteousness. That's the whole armor right there. And then Paul says some other things about the armor in a different passage. I read it the other day. It's similar. Hold on, there's these sharp burrs that are sticking in me. Ow. I'm sitting on one of them. Oh, okay, oh, shoot. All right, they're all around me. All right, it's okay. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. Yeah, with the armor of God. The woman singing it is from this place called Upper Room on YouTube, and she says, my uncle was going to that church, but she says, my victory's in Jesus' name. Jesus' name means God saves, God washes us clean. Yeshua, Yahweh, Yahshua. Anyway, there's bees all around. All right. So, he wasn't going to abandon his friends to the fiery darts of the wicked one. He ran to the side table before mentioned, right? Here's the sword of the Spirit. With a vague presentiment of what was coming, Mrs. Sclater, feeling rather than seeing him move across the room like a shadow, sat in dread expectation. And presently, her fear arrived in the shape of a large New Testament. He knew right where to go, right? And a face of loving sadness and keen discomfort, such as she had never before seen Gibbie wear. He held out the book to her, pointing with the finger to the words she could not refuse to let her eyes fall upon. Have salt in yourselves and have peace one with another. Wow. What Gibbie made of the salt I do not know, and whether he understood it or not was of little consequence, seeing he had it. He had salt. That's what he lived, right? That's what he's doing right now by loving them in this way. But the rest of the sentence he understood so well that he would fain have the writhing yoke fellows think of it, right? The lady's cheeks had been red before, but now they were redder. She rose, cast an angry look at the dumb prophet, a look which seemed to say, how dare you suggest such a thing, and left the room. What have you got there? Asked the minister, turning sharply upon him. Gibbie showed him the passage. "What have you got to do with it?" he retorted, throwing the book on the table. Right, as a minister, he threw the New Testament on the table. That's how all of us can be. "Go to bed, a detestable prig. You say, oh, a detestable prig, you say, reader?" He didn't call him that. Now you're saying, oh, that was detestable. But that is just what Mr. and Mr. Sclater thought him that night. But they never quarreled again before him. In truth, they were not given to quarreling. Many couples who love each other more quarrel more and with less politeness. For Gibbie, he went to bed puzzled and afraid there must have been a beam in his eye. So afraid he must have done something wrong or said something in the wrong way, Did he? Anyway, but he didn't, obviously. The very first time Donald and he could manage it, they set out together to find Mistress Croll. Donald thought he had nothing to do but walk straight from Mistress Birkinson's door to hers. But to his own annoyance and the disappointment of both, he soon found he had not a notion left as to how the place lay, except that it was by the river. So as it was already rather late, they put off their visit to another time and took a walk instead. But Mistress Croll, haunted by old memories, most of them far from pleasant, grew more and more desirous of looking upon the object of perhaps the least disagreeable amongst them. Because she knew Gibbie so well. She helped take care of him. But also she gave drink to his father, and also she was there when anyway, I already read it, so I don't want to, anyway. Perhaps the least disagreeable about them, she summoned resolution at last, went to the market a little better dressed than usual, and when business there was over, and she had shut up her little box of a shop, walked to Dorr Street to the minister's house. "He's often enough crossed my door," she said to herself, right? Because he used to be nosy in her business and tell her what to do. Speaking of Mr. Sclater, and it's not that I want sight of him. It's not about, anyway. I never let it be known, less nor was he welcome, being a minister, as goes the freedom of the poor folks' houses, and not to exchange to give them freedom to his. So it's this kind of language. So if you can translate it for us, go ahead and put it in the comments. But basically, she's just saying, well, if they're so free to come to the poor people's house, why can't we go to their house, right? Therewith, encouraging herself, she walked up the steps and rang the bell. It was a cold, frosty winter evening, and as she stood waiting for the door to be opened, much the poor woman longed for her own fireside and a dram, so she wanted whiskey herself. She got herself addicted to it. Her period of expectation was drawn out, not a little, through the fact that the servant whose duty it was to answer the bell was just then waiting at table because of a public engagement. The minister had to dine earlier than usual. Oh, because of a public engagement, the minister was dining earlier than usual. They were in the middle of their soup, cocky-leaky, nice and hot, when the maid informed her master that a woman was at the door wanting to see Sir Gibbie. Gibbie looked up, put down his spoon, and was rising to go, when the minister, laying his hand on his arm, pressed him gently back to his chair. And Gibbie yielded, waiting. He's learning what's the polite stuff to do. Hold on, I'll do this. Oops. I guess that's not, whatever. What sort of a woman? He asked the girl. A decent-looking, working-like body, she answered. I couldn't see her very well. It's so foggy this night about the door. Tell her we're at dinner. She might call again in an hour. Or if she likes to leave a message, stay. Tell her to come again tomorrow morning. I wonder who she is, he added, turning, he thought, to Gibbie. Right, watch. But Gibbie won't have any of this kind of, quote, politeness. That ain't politeness to him, right? Someone comes to visit him, he's going to go care for that person. But Gibbie was gone. He had passed behind his chair, and all he saw of him was his back as he followed the girl from the room. In his eagerness, he left the door open, and they saw him dart to the visitor, shake hands with her in evident delight, and begin pulling her towards the room. Now Mistress Croll, though nowise inclined to quail before the minister, would not willingly have intruded herself upon him, especially while he sat at dinner with his rather formidable lady. But she fancied, for she stood where she could not see into the dining room, that Gibbie was taking her where they might have a quiet news together, and occupied with her bonnet or some other source of feminine disquiet, remained thus mistaken until she stood on the threshold, when, looking up, she stopped, made an obedience to the minister, obedience, you know, when you like bow, and another to the minister's lady, and stood doubtful, if not a little abashed. "Not here, my good woman," said Mr. Sclater, rising. "Oh, it's you, Mistress Croll. I will speak to you in the hall." Mrs. Croll's face flushed, and she drew back a step, but Gibbie still held her, and with a look to Mr. Sclater that should have sent straight to his heart the fact that she was dear to his soul, kept drawing her into the room. He wanted her to take his chair at the table. It passed swiftly through her mind that one who had been so intimate both with Sir George and Sir Gibbie in the old time, had given the latter his tea every Sunday night for so long, might surely, even in such changed circumstances, be allowed to enter the same room with him, however grand it might be, and involuntarily almost yielded half a doubtful step, while Mr. Sclater, afraid of offending Sir Gilbert, hesitated on the advance to prevent her. How friendly the warm air felt, how consoling the crimson walls with the soft flicker of the great fire upon them, how delicious the odor of the cocky leaky. She could give up whiskey a good deal more easily, she thought, if she had the comforts of a minister to fall back on, like this beautiful house and a fire and a servant with hot soup that someone else made for her, right? And this was the same minister who had once told her that her soul was as precious to him as that of any other in his parish, and then driven her from respectable Jink Lane to the disreputable Dowerfoot. It all passed through her mind in a flash, while yet Gibbie pulled and she resisted. "Gilbert, come here," called Mrs. Sclater. He went to her side, obedient and trusting as a child. "Really, Gilbert, you must not," she said, rather loud for a whisper. "It won't do to turn things upside down this way. If you are to be a gentleman and an intimate of my house, you must behave like other people. I cannot have a woman like that sitting at my table. Do you know what sort of person she is?" Gibbie's face shone up. He raised his hands. He was already able to talk a little. "Is she a sinner?" he asked on his fingers. Wow. Remember, this chapter is called The Sinner. Wow. Mrs. Sclater nodded. Gibbie wheeled around and sprang back to the hall, whither the minister had, coming down upon her, bows on like a sea-shouldering whale, in a manner ejected Mistress Croll, and where he was now talking to her with an air of confidential condescension, willing to wipe out any feeling of injury she might perhaps be inclined to cherish at not being made more welcome. To his consternation, Gibbie threw his arms round her neck and gave her a great hug. "Sir Gilbert," he exclaimed, very angry, and the more angry that he knew he was in the right, "leave Mistress Croll alone and go back to your dinner immediately. Jane, open the door." Jane opened the door. Gibbie let her go, and Mrs. Croll went. But on the threshold she turned. "Well, sir," she said, with more severity than pique, and a certain sad injury not unmingled with dignity, "ye has just stepped over my door-sill many's the time, and that was sore words in your morning, and you mightn't pay any back. And I never said for you to be going," because he said mean things to her, right? "So you first turned me out of my house, and now you turn me out of yours. Is that what's left, to turn me out? But the house of the Lord, that's all that's left, is to turn me out of the Lord's house. Are you planning to do that?" "Ah, indeed, sir. You need never wonder again of the likes of me. It doesn't care about going to hear you preach the gospel, if you would fain see it practiced now. Given you had said to me of the night, come on in, Mistress Croll, and take a plate of cocky leaky with us. It's a cold night, and myself would have been so uplifted with your kindness, and I would have gone home and taken, I don't know, a read at my Bible and been to seeing the kirk upon Sunday, the church, gone to the church on Sunday. I would, and that ye may be sure, for it's a heap easier going to the church, nor to read the book you're laying when you come thinking upon what it says to you. But no, now I'm away home to the whiskey bottle, and that's because of you out there in such a night and a fog, and just leave me at your door, something like that, right? I'll show you it so you can read it yourself, and if you want to take a screenshot, because it's free copyright. You shall have a plate of soup and welcome, Mistress Croll, said the minister, in a rather stagey tone of hospitality. Jane, take Mistress Croll to the kitchen with you. Oh, the devil's tail with your soup, I should say it, Mistress Croll, drawing herself up suddenly with a snort of anger. What turn I a beggar? I fain be informed. When I turn into a beggar, I'll be informed. Was it your soup or your grace that I wanted, sir, or something? The Lord be between you and me, to judge between us, right? To say what's right. That'll be the first and the last, and there'll be the first that will be last, and the last will be first. Jesus said that, right? But the tain's not to me, and tither's to you, sir. Like, one's not to me, and I'm not the last, and you're not the first. With that, she turned and walked down the steps, holding her head high. Really, Sir Gilbert, said the minister, going back into the dining room. But no Gibbie was there, nobody but his wife, sitting in solitary discomposure at the head of her dinner table. The same instant, he heard a clatter of feet down the steps and turned quickly into the hall again, where Jane was in the act of shutting the door. Sir Gilbert's run out after the woman, sir, she said. Hoot, grunted the minister, greatly displeased, and went back to his wife. Take Sir Gilbert's plate away, said Mrs. Sclater to the servant. That's his New Testament again, she went on, when the girl had left the room. My dear, take care, said her husband. He had not much notion of obedience to God, even though he's a minister, right? But he had some idea of respect to religion, right? Wow. He was just an idolater of a Christian shade. Wow. Jesus says many of you will say, Lord, Lord, and having done miracles in his name, but he'll say, I never knew you. I never knew you. You didn't know me in your heart. You didn't act upon the way that I was to people. You didn't know me, and I didn't know you. Anyway, so he was just an idolater of a Christian shade. So Christianity was just an idolatry for him. He was just worshiping a false god, a fake God called Christianity, but it wasn't the true Christianity, unfortunately. But it changes in the story, and we only have a little bit left, right? Really, Mr. Sclater, his wife continued, I had no idea what I was undertaking, but you gave me no choice. The creature is incorrigible. But of course, he must prefer the society of women like that. They are the sort he was accustomed to when he received his first impressions. And how could it be otherwise? You know how he had been brought up, and what you had to expect. Brought up, cried the minister, and caused his spoonful of cocky leaky to rush into his mouth with the noise of the German schlürfen. I don't know what that is. Schlürfen? Anyway, then burst into a loud laugh. You should have seen him about the streets with his trousers. Mr. Sclater, then you ought to have known better, said his wife, and laying down her spoon, sat back into the embrace of her chair. But in reality, she was not the least sorry he had undertaken the charge, brought Gibbie to their house. She could not help loving the boy, and her words were merely the foam of vexation, mingled with not a little jealousy that he had left her and his nice hot dinner to go with the woman. Had she been a fine lady like herself, I doubt if she would have liked it much better, but she specially recoiled from coming into rivalry with one in whose house a horrible murder had been committed, and who had been before the magistrates in consequence. She had to go to court and testify what had happened at that place with the quarrel that had happened there. Nothing further was said until the second course was on the table. Then the lady spoke again. You really must, Mr. Sclater, teach him the absurdity of attempting to fit every point of his behavior to words which were of course quite suitable to the time when they were spoken, but which it is impossible to take literally nowadays, as impossible as to go about the streets with a great horn on your head and a veil hanged across it. Why, Here she laughed, a laugh the less ladylike that, although it was both low and musical, it was scornful and a little shaken by doubt. You saw him throw his arms round the horrid creature's neck. Well, he had just asked me if she was a sinner. I made no doubt she was. Off with the word goes my gentleman to embrace her. Here they laughed together. Dinner over, they went to a missionary meeting where the one stood and made a speech and the other sat and listened while Gibbie was having tea with Mistress Croll. From that day, Gibbie's mind was much exercised as to what he could do for Mistress Croll, and now first he began to wish he had his money. As fast as he learned the finger alphabet, he had taught it to Donald, and as they already had a good many symbols to use in use between them, so many indeed that Donald would often, instead of speaking, make use of signs. They had now the means of intercourse almost as free as if they had between them the two tongues instead of one. It was easy, therefore, for Gibbie to impart to Donald his anxiety concerning her and his strong desire to help her, and doing so he lamented in a gentle way his present inability. This communication Donald judged it wise to impart in his turn to Mistress Croll. You see, ma'am, he said in conclusion, he's some way or another gotten it into his head that you're just as free, that something about you're free with the bottle. I don't know. You'll be the best judge of that yourself. Mistress Croll was silent for a whole minute by the clock. From the moment when Gibbie forsook his dinner and his grand new friends to go with her, the woman's heart had begun to grow to the boy, and her old memories fed the new crop of affection. Wow. Well, she replied at length, with no little honesty, I may be some ills thinks for me, for I had an eye towards his father before him. But the bairn, the young child, the child's right in the main, as he would look until he was done, for I had been loath to disappoint the bonny lad. A Master Grant given over there was a Christian soul upon the face of the wicked world. That Christian soul is wee Sir Gibbie. And what could he have thought about it? But it's the Lord's doing, and marvellous in our eyes. Oh, you needn't think like that. I know my Bible, not that ill, she added, catching a glimmer of surprise in Donald's countenance. But for that Mr. Sclater did, I wouldn't be sore upon him, but gin he was fit to something, nail a nail there, and fix it, I don't know what she's saying, artois, creeping upon the rigging of the church. I would sure he's no wise master builder, fit to lay on one foundation. So he keeps acting like he's building onto the church. But she's like saying, I don't think he could put a nail in, he's not added anything really to it, something like that. Oh, you can read it yourself again and put it in the comments if you know what they're saying. I'm real sure he's not a wise master builder to fit any foundation. I tell you, I know my book that well, or that ill. I didn't know it that. Anyway, she added with some triumph, then resumed. Okay, we're going to just finish the chapter because there's only this page and a quarter more. What in the world would he or she or Sir Gibbie had been thought had they invited me, and I was there to sit down and take a plate of their cocky leaky with them? There was and thought of them, it was not for me, good enough company for them, and maybe sat down with him after that, with the help of my bonny wee Sir Gibbie. I can't help calling him wee Sir Gibbie because that's how she knew him in childhood. Here's the rest of her conversation, right? He'll be a big man, or he be, whatever. As for the tea, I wasn't one to take an honor when an honor wasn't given, or something like this. Well, I knew him, and his honest father, for ever there was an honest man, yon was him. Never did I catch him call him anything but Sir George, neither more nor less. And the thought of at the hardest, at the cobbling of he would cobble on Saturdays, was pleased to wash, and he would go to the house, the bathroom that she had at the whiskey house that she owned, and wash himself and put on a clean shirt of her she was a widow, so her husband's, her dead husband's, rest his soul. And so, I'm not a papist, Master Grant. So she's talking to Donald Grant. And you know better than you think, but over these praying for them, and gone what's not. I'll pay heed to the heathen prayers, or that would be. No, I want to pray for the living, and that may do some good still. Not know for them as over with the Lord already. Have mercy upon them. I don't know what she's saying altogether there, but anyway. My readers may suspect one for one, reason after for another, that she had already, before Donald came that evening, been holding communion with the idol in the three-cornered temple of her cupboard, right? Her cupboard. She had a corner cupboard with the whiskey in it. And I confess it was so, but it was equally true that before the next year was gone, she was a shade better, and that not without considerable struggle, more failures than successes. Upon one occasion, let those who analyze the workings of the human mind, as they would the entrails of an 8-day clock, explain the phenomenon I am about to relate, or decline to believe it, as they choose. She became suddenly aware that she was getting perilously near the brink of actual drunkenness. I'll take but this mouthful more, she said to herself. It's but a mouthful, it's the last of the bottle, and it would be a pity not to get the good of it. She poured it out. It was nearly half a glass. She took it in one large mouthful, but while she held it in her mouth to make the most of it, even while it was between her teeth, something smote her with the sudden sense that this very moment was the crisis of her fate. And now the axe was laid to the root of her tree. She dropped on her knees, not to pray like poor Sir George, but to spout the mouthful of whiskey into the fire. In roaring flame it rushed up the chimney. She started back. She cried. Good God! It's like a devil I mean to be carrying like that inside of me, Lord. I'm perfectly something of the devil's. My name is Legion. What is to become of my poor soul? It was a week before she drank another drop, and she took her devils with circumspection and the firm resolve to let no more of them enter into her than she could manage to keep in order. Mr. and Mrs. Sclater got over their annoyance as well as they could and agreed that in this case no notice should be taken of Gibbie's conduct, right, of leaving for someone who cared for him so much in his childhood, probably kept him alive, right? The next chapter is called Shoals Ahead. All right. I wish you so much love. Thanks for being here. Sorry it took a little longer. Much love.